We're live.
Good morning. We are in Senate Judiciary. It's January 30th. We're taking up a new version of S208, and we have the council be with us to give us the walkthrough.
Good morning, Sophie Stanley for the Office of Legislative Counsel. Do I have your permission to share my screen?
Yes.
This is a strike rule amendment. I did it as a strike rule because there were enough changes, and then I know that there may even be further changes, so it seems like the safest way to go. And on this version, I've highlighted where the changes were just to make it a little bit easier to follow. So first of all, in section 1, the professor from NYU had noted that Vermont isn't granted power by the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is recognizing that Vermont already has this power. So I just changed the language there to reflect that Vermont would be exercising its power as recognized by the 10th Amendment. Top of page 2, there was testimony regarding adding unique radio number as a possible alternative to a badge number for a law enforcement officer. So that adds that language in, and then adding the agency as well. So in terms of identification, a law enforcement officer would be identified by their name or their unique radio or badge number and by their agency. And then moving further down in subsection 3, this is talking about the exceptions to the prohibition on wearing masks or personal disguises. And this combined what originally was A and B. There was a surgical mask and an N95 respirator. And so this added, A now adds both of those into a single one, and then he numbers the subsequent paragraphs. There was concern around the previous language that talked about you could wear a mask to protect against cold if there was a declared emergency, and sort of how that would be defined. And so one of the suggestions was to look at what the requirements are for the emergency housing program, shelter program. And so this is the current language that's used, which is between December 1st and April 1st, and when the National Weather Service is forecasting a duration of cold weather at or below -10 degrees Fahrenheit, which includes with the wind chill.
My initial thought on that is, well, first I appreciate finding the specifics there for that and putting that in, but I guess I'm a little concerned if it's -8 degrees and or something along those lines, and somebody, if you're still out there for a number of hours, certainly for a long hiker, is going to be, there's a chance of getting frostbite still. I was wondering if there's a way to incorporate maybe was that like a search and rescue function? Yeah, there's search and rescue that we could put in, but I'm wondering if for this specific section, perhaps doing some sort of reasonable person standard, or saying, there's a substantial risk of physical safety as a result of dangerously low temperatures, and if there's some way to incorporate the reasonable person standard, then there'd be less of a chance that there'd be an argument that, well, it's 50 degrees and that's dangerous for me, and allowing somebody to wear a mask then. But in the reasonable person situation, if it's -10 degrees and you're on the side of a mountain for 3 hours looking for somebody, that's a reasonable person would probably say that that's substantial risk, and you can wear a mask to avoid frostbite. Or perhaps we could cover it just with search and rescue.
Well, one thing I would just note, apologies, is that there is language in here that the prohibition is the law enforcement officer shall not wear any mask or personal disguise while interacting with the public in the performance of the officer's duties. If you're doing a search and rescue, you would only be interacting once you found the person. You wouldn't be interacting as you're on the mountain. So I think that's one thought I have on that.
It's a good point. So I'll post it.
Yeah, what my understanding too is we mirror this language after the cold weather sections. So this is when we would, is that correct? It's mirrored after the cold weather exceptions for people who are experiencing homelessness.
Right, that was the language, and I can, that, yeah.
The same language we use to say that actually people should have shelter if it's this cold.
This is, yes,
Which I
this
agree.
was for the extreme cold weather shelter program. My understanding is it does change periodically. And then this was the language that the time frame they're using and the temperature that they use.
I will just say to that is that a mask can be worn in above negative and with that. And I get Notter's point about, setting a number and having to argue above or below that and just making it the reasonable person's standard. Because I was looking up, this frostbite occurred or something like that.
Then there was around the exception for law enforcement officers participating in undercover drug related operations. And then it was to include if they're operating with the Vermont Drug Task Force was one of the requested changes. And subsection D is new, and this provides for the creation of a statewide policy. And it sets the time as January 1 of 2027 to give time for the policy to be developed. And provides that the Vermont Criminal Justice Council would establish a statewide policy governing the standards that would be applicable to Vermont law enforcement agencies. And then the final section, the change in under the penalty provision, and I know there's still really discussion around penalties, but it was to take out that certification, before there was language in there about an officer could use that certification or licensure.
So I appreciate the policy change. I would have some conversation about very explicitly naming that policy should address misconduct and decertification.
So, hold on one second. So that currently, I did look into that, and currently, existing law. So this is the unprofessional conduct provisions. It's under the Criminal Justice Council. And there was talk about category B, and that's a willful failure to comply with a state required policy. So if you have a statewide policy that's required by the statute, if somebody violates that, they would be subject to a category B conduct from professional conduct under current law.
Yeah, just a quick question. I mean, I like this proposal, but I do have a question on page 3, line 6. Where it says law enforcement officer with the Vermont Drug Task Force. I don't have a problem with that. Is that being too specific? If you take larger municipalities like Burlington, for instance, I know Salamis has, I can't see them working in conjunction with, but they do have their own task force. I'm just wondering, and if this reads line the way that it is, that's good, but.
Yeah, we are reaching out to somebody from the drug task force to figure out more specific language. I don't want to disrupt the task force that may exist outside of drug task force. I have been under the impression that they all work in conjunction to some degrees. But there are embedded officers, Burlington, Vermont Drug Task Force, working with Coopers, things like that. So I'm not sure what the specific language would need to be just to make sure that we're covering the bases for that category of exceptions.
Well, I don't want to hold this up just for that one exception. I don't think that it would be in conversation with the task force materials, if they're either available or not, is it move up?
I mean, I'm wondering if. I think one of the concerns raised by Senator Baruth was the notion that, at least on the federal side of things, they'll just say that everything is a drug-related operation related to anything that they're doing, and thus they could wear a mask if we didn't have the Vermont Drug Task Force line on it.
I don't want to take it out, I just want to say, are there any other agencies that have their own, task forces?
Yeah, wondering if we put law enforcement officers within, or working within, or in conjunction with the Vermont Drug Task Force.
I don't think there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
But there may be that, like, the Burlington, Springfield, Southborough, I don't know if they're that or fast. I know that the city has 2-3 guys that work.
Yeah.
Or did, used to work the drugs. I think they reached out for one drug task force. I just don't want to limit them just in case they do.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Do you have any thoughts?
I can certainly add that language, that makes sense.
Okay.
That's easy to add, but I mean, we still have the outstanding question around the penalty.
So,
I also have a question around the effective date. Just in the event this were to move forward, whether it would be effective on passage or effective, July 1, 2026.
my preference would be that it takes effect on passage, and that but we give the Justice Council some time to establish a statewide policy rather than. Yeah, for them it says on or before January 1, 2027. So that would presumably give them about 6 months. And it sounds like they've already been working on it.
It sounded like the law enforcement advisory board has been working on it, and so then it would come to the Criminal Justice Council.
I am, so yeah, that's my opinion on the effective dates. Or like any other territories.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't have a problem with effective upon passage, but should we give them some points an opportunity to at least be aware of this, their days or something? I mean, where it's their violation, they need to know that the law just passed, it say.
Well, I mean, it presumably wouldn't pass until sometime in May or June.
Okay. They're all gonna be notified of this new law, so what to say, and I'm just looking at. I don't want to unintentionally be a violation of the policy or the new law.
Yeah. Sarah Rose. I mean, sorry, Sarah Rose.
Well, that was close.
I know, we look so much alike. I think this has gotten a fair amount of media coverage, and so I would imagine most people are aware that it's moving through the process. And I would certainly hope that the folks that are, the criminal justice council, the folks that have been in here are communicating to their networks that this is moving. But I certainly think we could also, as it gets closer to passing, put out some sort of public statement to let people know.
Yeah. I mean, it is the responsibility of counsel for whether it's the Department of Public Safety or municipal attorney. Follow these things, and I'm sure that they are following this, and they'll be aware that it would take effect on passage. Yeah, that's my initial feeling on it.
But I don't know, every year when I post that question as far as being taken effect on passage, I have a problem with it. Just want to make sure that I guess it just takes what they don't unintentionally. Not being aware. I'm not saying push it to July 1st, it's not what I'm saying. It's just making sure they're looking at it.
did you make a
proposal to change it to a certain date? I just said 30 days, just something to give them 2 weeks to, I don't care what it is, as long as we make sure that they're aware of this before the unintentional, violation.
I mean, what is the shortest amount of time we've seen, bill take effect after a signature?
Well, yeah, on passage would be, but
Well, yeah, aside from.
yeah, yeah, maybe three months, like, so if it's signed in. I mean, sometimes it says, September, October, or something like that, but I guess I tend to agree with the idea that it's probably easy enough to understand and well known enough that it's going through that if the governor signs it, I think law enforcement officers will be.
That's fine, I just want to make sure that.
Yeah.
So my mind to go is going to sign it, so. Yeah.
Right.
Senator Bowles.
I. Senator Bruce, like, let's put mine, I don't want to. Prior to that.
Senator Ruth, there was also a proposed change on page 3 regarding one of your concerns.
Vermont Drug Task Force.
Yeah, and the issue with, at least as it relates to the federal government, them saying that everything is drug related, therefore you can always wear a mask. And Senator Norris brought up the point that there may be members of local police departments that have their own task force, but from my very general understanding, I'm under the impression that they all work together in some capacity or another. Could be mistaken, but we are waiting to hear back from the tenant or captain, I can't remember. But the proposed change that I offered was making it law enforcement officers working within or conjunction with the Vermont Drug Task Force, which I think kind of broadened it a bit. So there's a Burlington PD officer in their own task force in Burlington. And there's some overlap with the Vermont Drug Task Force. Then I think that it would cover that as well. But
And that would also be true maybe of federal law enforcement who are working in the task force.
it would be,
Yeah.
and there,
Which I'd be fine with.
yeah, there are federal agents, like the DEA officer, would be working in conjunction with the Vermont Drug Task Force. So it broadens it in some way, but also keeps it narrowly focused to working under that category.
No, it looks good to me. I see the piece about, the weather.
Oh, yeah, we can revisit that one in a second.
Yeah. I mean, that looks fine to me as well. My concern there was just that I didn't want to have it be, and, up to the law enforcement officer themselves to say, well, it's a little cold today, so I get to wear pants. So,
Senator Meadows?
I'm just back up B there for B. Does that bring up any discriminatory concerns? Like just allowing a Vermont law officer doing a drug related activity?
It's a good point. I wonder, actually, Ledge Council was your thought, and
He's concerned with this, if there's a difference between federal and state.
Yeah, kind of like what happened with California.
I mean, it says law enforcement officers with the Vermont Drug Task Force, so again, if there's federal officers that are working with the Vermont Drug Task Force, then they would be covered by that as well. So I don't think it's singling out, distinguishing that way. It would just be excluding officers that are not working. Undercover on drug related investigations.
so
That naked discriminatory.
I don't think so.
No. Because it allows a Vermont law officer or a federal law
Right,
officer
it's not-
working with
The
the Vermont Drug Task Force, but if a federal agency is not working with the Vermont Drug Task Force, they are not allowed. That's where the discriminatory part. In,
Right, but all law enforcement officers, whether they're state or federal, that are working with the Vermont Drug Task Force would be covered by this.
no, I get that, but if you're saying you have to work with a Vermont Drug Task Force if you are a federal agent. If you are not, if you are a federal agent, not working with the task force and not with,
Right.
But same with the state, law
Right.
enforcement, that's not working with the town.
Any law enforcement officer not working with the Vermont Drug Task Force would then be covered by.
it just raises a.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So those.
No, I just, that was gonna make that same point Sylvie does, is the exception applies universally to federal and state. But I don't see the discriminatory aspect.
As long as you're working within the Vermont task force.
Right, but every exception applies that way. It is as it applies to federal and state as long as you're doing the thing named.
I guess you're not understanding what I'm saying. A federal agency does not have the same protection working on a drug related operation as someone that is working under the Vermont Drug Task Force.
Right, but a federal agency that's working with the Vermont Drug Task Force does, so it applies universally to the federal and local, state and state police.
Karma, if you work with the Vermont Drug Task Force.
Right, but the exception applies universally. I don't understand.
I understand what you're saying though, is if you have a federal officer that's working on undercover on the drug issue in Vermont, but it's not working with the Vermont
Right.
Drug Task Force. But I would, again, I don't know enough about how different, I mean, it sounds like you'll be getting testimony on this or hearing from folks. But I would just, that there would be some overlap that again, federal officers, whether they're with the DEA or whatever, would be working, coordinating with the Vermont Drug
Yeah,
Task
if
Force.
that's true, that's totally fine. Yeah. That's if you common practice.
And then the other things is this will go with the other bodies. And they'll vet all of these questions again. So, and then come back to us. So we'll have time, but, so right now it seems like it's, what are you calling it? Senator hosted universal exception? Well,
If it's a universal exception, it applies universally.
This common answer.
Like very good examiner, so I don't even know if that's the correct punctuation.
Oh, yeah.
The cold weather exception, we wanted to bring that up.
Oh, I was just saying, I like the language that's been put in there because it's not leading it to possibly overly broad reading of, anytime there's something that would be called cold weather, you can just ask stuff. This is pretty specific. Thank you.
And I do appreciate that it's broader than a declared weather emergency, because that would have excluded almost every instance.
Yeah, a point I had raised previously is, in regard to, let's say it's -9 degrees and you're out on the side of a mountain for 3 or 4 hours looking for a long hiker. You're still susceptible to getting frostbite. But then, like Council mentioned, that this is when you're interacting with the public in the performance of your duties, right? And so yeah, if you're searching on the side of a mountain and you finally find the person, you have to take your mask off. But yeah, if you re-clarify, or review that point again, so that you fully understand it.
So, I mean, the current language on the prohibition is that an officer will not wear a mask or personal disguise while interacting with the public in the performance of the officer's duties. So if somebody's not actually interacting with the public, I don't think there would be a prohibition on wearing wrongs. It would just be when they are interacting. And again, this, you know, it's really about identification, so
Yeah.
people know. So if search and rescue, I would imagine someone being very thankful to being found, and they know that it's the
Probably
folks that are
not
coming to
correct,
rescue
yeah.
them. So,
And I think, even if it were, just say 10 degrees and, somebody's walking the beat or whatever, somewhere in, one of these towns, and it's middle of the night, there's nobody there, they can wear a mask. But if they find somebody, they want to talk to them, regardless of how cold it is, let's say it's 20 degrees, they'll stop to take the mask off, and so the person can know who they're talking to. Like, I think, is that a correct?
yeah, the other alternative would be to increase the amount. I mean, and this was what was requested, but for them, I mean, just given how cold the weather's been in the past week, I mean, that's very cold, -10.
Yeah.
With the wind chill, so again, the committee doesn't have to use -10, we could use a higher amount of that.
What, I saw your hand up earlier, and then Sarah Norris.
I like your idea of a reasonable person test. Because like I'm thinking today, I don't know what the wind chill is, but it's like 3 degrees out. That's pretty cold, but the reasonable person test, and like you just said, if you're walking the beat, not pick on Burlington, but down Church Street, and you're walking along, and there's the public around you, does that interacting with the public if you're not saying something?
Yes, I would say.
Right? So if you have a mask on, then you'd be outside of the guidelines of this, if it's, -5. But I think a reasonable person would say, if it's -5 and -9, whatever the degree is.
Yeah. I mean, the reasonable person piece was without my understanding of, what Sylvia had just described earlier with, let's say it's 20 degrees and you're not interacting with the public, you can still wear a mask, that's cold for you. But the whole point being, if you're interacting with somebody, if you're around the public, they want to know who the police officer is, and at that point, no mask. So,
Walking up and down Church Street on a beat, and it's 0 degrees out. Day like today, no mask.
I could see going to 0.
So anyway,
Norris, and then
that's where
Sarah.
the number, I like.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump on what kind of was just, I think the reasonable cruise. Here it started. Yeah, temperature, things going around, say also only -9 degrees here, so now your violations. I think we need to be reasonable here. This is, like to test it as a guideline. To abide by, and there is some very, I would say, this reasonable cruise. Should have gone later.
Idea. Okay. Sarah Norris.
So I would be more open to using the reasonable person standard if this was a criminal offense, but who proves that it's the reasonable person standard if it's just a civil offense? Is it just up to the objective or subjective view of whoever maybe or maybe isn't issuing a civil ticket? Like that to me would really only come into play if this were facing sort of the corporate judgment. So I'm much more comfortable just naming on the paper, this is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, there's 2 points, this is where officer discretion comes in. I mean, honestly, I think if it's -5 and somebody's walking the beat, I don't think you're gonna put officers out there walking around with -5, but either way, hypothetically, if that were to happen, somebody's wearing a mask, another officer sees that, they do have the discretion, say, not gonna write a ticket to the officer walking the beat. They're wearing a mask. Other people can see them, but they're not interacting with anybody directly. I'm not gonna write them a ticket. I think that's where officer discretion comes in. And I had a second point, which I forgot, but they come back to me. Oh, the reasonable person standard, draft ticket can go to court. They can be kept, and then the judge would be the one to determine. I don't think they're going. Well, maybe a draft ticket will get to a jury, but either way, the judge most of the time determine if a legal person would be right.
I think we're forwarding it on the street. I'm happy to pick readings right now, so I understand.
But you're happy with the way it reads now?
Yeah.
The negative 10.
So are there,
That is not.
Yes. I'm waiting
Money
right
on
now.
comment on it.
Really, is sheriff in perpetuity ever, like forever, like senator, once a sheriff, always a sheriff?
Spring, all spring, sure, both.
All right,
So they say,
Once a clerk of the committee, it'll lose.
there you have it.
well then I'm still clerk too. If you're
Welcome,
clerk.
so the only change that we have right now is on page 3, line 6, where we're saying working within or in conjunction with the Vermont Drug Task Force.
Yeah.
That's the only change.
That's just in case there is. I mean, I'm not saying there is, but larger municipalities, like, well, so they may have their own. But they're gonna work together anyway, so they want.
Rotary had its own good task.
Senator Bohosky.
I mean, I still think this should be a criminal penalty, and I'm waiting to hear back from the con law professor. As I think I mentioned before, I recall her saying that was more defensible, but I am waiting to get verbal confirmation. And
Criminal is more.
I believe so. And so I reached out and asked to confirm that, and then also asked for her to expand on why that is in fact her view.
Mhm.
But I have a whole host of reasons, but I don't want to dive into them until I have that confirmation. Because if I am misremembering, yeah, I don't want to misquote. So I'm just waiting for that response.
Yeah. There's a chance sorry, were you about
I
to
was
say?
just gonna say, one of the other options is you could have it be a civil penalty for like the first or second violation, and then it could become a criminal offense if somebody is, repeatedly doing it. So that is an option as well.
Yeah. And I may be misremembering it, but from what I have recalled, it was that it wouldn't make a difference in defensibility as whether it's civil or criminal. But again, it could be misremembering. I mean, I can see, from the other standpoint, if you're the government arguing that this is interfering with your ability to form an investigation, and it would be a witness misdemeanor for the criminal. You're talking about arresting an officer in violation of this, if it's their second or third offense or whatever it may be, as opposed to writing a ticket, which, doesn't strain your liberty as much. But I don't know if that's a reach of an argument, but sometimes we see arguments that are reaches.
And that's why I just wanted to flag that I'm still waiting for
Yeah.
that response.
Yeah, and if it's in a state way, there's a language just needs to be tweaked a little bit, because right now, the way it read, if it's a criminal offense, it would need to be it's a civil.
I thought so we didn't.
I didn't change
Okay,
that.
got
I just took out the language around the loss of certification or licensure.
it. Okay, so I guess. Yeah, follow.
I did have a follow-up question, and it's for you or maybe Senator Sheriff Norris. And that is if it is absolutely going to happen every time someone commits a misdemeanor that they will be arrested, or can they be cited and not detained? Do
You
you know what I
can
mean?
create. I know there are some violations where if it's observed, shall write a ticket. I think underage drinking tickets are like that, where if you encounter it, you will write a ticket. I think. Well, yeah, that's the answer to your question. So it is possible to make it a mandatory enforcement.
No, that's not my question. My question is if someone, I don't know, broke a window and it was $1,000 window, are they absolutely going to get arrested or could they get a summons to court? Like, yep, you've committed a crime, but we don't need to take you in.
Well, it depends, that goes to Rule 3, which outlines when somebody can be taken into custody, so like with a witnessed misdemeanor, you can take somebody into custody, you don't necessarily have to, could write them the citation. But that is something that comes down to officer discretion.
Right, well, and I think that was sort of where what I was getting at to your previous point is there are instances in which someone commits a criminal offense and they are not arrested and taken into custody. And so there is still some discretion there, even if this were a criminal offense to not to write them a citation.
Yep. All right, so I guess generally I'll just ask, what is the committee's initial response to the idea of having for a first offense, a civil ticket, and the second, or maybe the third offense being a misdemeanor offense?
So I like that idea. I guess I would rather have it be the second offense becomes a misdemeanor, because if you get to the third, you're dealing with somebody who's intentional. In fact, I think if you get to the second, you're dealing with somebody who's intentionally allowing the system. And what I'm thinking of here, and I know I sound paranoid half the time, but the Trump administration has made a policy of if they don't like something, they ignore it. And if they ultimately get fined by a court, money floods in to pay the fine. So often people are held harmless by, anonymous donors who pay fines like this, or people do GoFundMe's to pay fines like this. So I like the idea of having the second be a misdemeanor, because $1,000 sounds like a lot, but if you're talking about ICE, to take one example of who's covered in this, they have very deep pockets at this point and might just decide it's the cost of doing business if they're going to send people out mass. So,
I appreciate this as a sort of midpoint compromise between purely being civil and purely being criminal. And, it's not exactly what would be my ideal, but I can support it.
Support which specifically, the second offense being
Yes, the
criminal?
second offense being criminal and the first being civil. Like I said, I would prefer it just be a criminal offense. But I feel like this is a midway point that I could support as a compromise.
Senators?
Well, as you well know, I prefer the civil offense. Then looking at this down this road, I don't really with second offense being criminal offense. I couldn't kick around the idea of a third offense being a criminal offense, but not the second. That's too close to. I don't like the criminal offense to begin with, so that's okay.
I guess if you get to it,
Senator Norris and I are.
you're kind of dealing with somebody who's looking you in the eye and saying, I'm not going to observe this law.
Yeah, I don't like the criminal offense portion on anything. I could entertain, I guess, the possibility of, because if you got a person who has now violated twice and been found that he or she wasn't in violation, this is third one kind of establishes a pattern here, such as our DUI law, the third one being a conviction, the third one being a felony.
What about if we had first two be civil, but the second has a higher penalty than 1,000?
I'm fine with that.
And that way you've got a graduated response with a third being a criminal.
But you have to keep it below, what was it, the max, $2,000 reports of criminal offense.
That's for a criminal offense.
Yeah.
If it's a civil violation, you can make it. There's CDL violations that are thousands of dollars.
Yeah, so make it 2,500.
I was gonna say,
I think it's it.
I'm gonna say $500.
I-
You go up, you can go $500 each violation, but I mean, 2,500, hit it out of the park.
Well, I was gonna suggest 5,000 for a second violation, so.
Sarah Manos, do you have any,
I'm flexible on the numbers.
any thoughts on that?
1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out, I guess. And graduate the fine.
So 1,000, then 2,500, and then a
This,
$1,000 misdemeanor. The third offense.
So the fine goes down for the third?
Yeah, but get charged with a crime.
Criminal offense.
Is that when it starts to go felony or
Yeah,
the amount? that-
yeah, it's at $2,000.
Oh,
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
We keep the misdemeanor fine at the same as the second offense. Oh, no, because that's above 2,000.
So we're gonna go 1,000, 1,500, then a criminal.
I thought it was 1,000, 2,500. That's great.
Doesn't really matter. I mean, I think if you're getting charged with a crime and the potential penalty is $1,000, you know, you'll get fined probably, I don't know if you'll get fined when you actually resolve the case, but you'll also have a misdemeanor.
Yeah,
I think these are up to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the crime carries more weight than the monetary.
Yeah.
I mean, my preference would still be that it be 1 and 2 as a compromise, but I mean, it's not a hill I'm gonna die on today.
Okay. So
So lots of emergencies.
Yeah, my land posting bill. I'll be going. Yeah.
okay, so it sounds like at least with the penalty, then we're on the same page that, or we agree with the bill. If it were first, second, and third, first offense being $1,000, second offense being 2,500. And the first two still being a civil ticket, third offense, $1,000 misdemeanor.
Okay. I can, well, I think 2,500 to this thing, but
You think it's been,
I think it's been low.
say compromise, right in between.
Okay, all right, well, that's good. Yeah, so, yeah, if we can make those changes to it. And I know we also, there was an invitation extended to the Mock Drug Task Force and their captains come and testify next week. I also reached out to the Office of Racial Equity. I think they mentioned they wanted to testify on it. And the AG mentioned they have quick testimony on it as well. So that's lined up for next week. And then I think that'll coincide with the changes that we've requested, and then hopefully we can vote this out.
So do you want the changes, I'm guessing you want the changes ahead so people know that they're reacting to the most recent version, right?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
And then
Can we come up with anything on the task force, or we're gonna just leave that as it?
the change I proposed was law enforcement officers working within or in conjunction with a contract.
That's
And then we will get a response from, hopefully get a response from the drug task force. Then. That work. Yes, we have. Then. We didn't propose any, we talked about it, but we didn't propose any changes with the cold weather section. And everything else looks good. But I think, yeah, for those changes, we'll revisit it soon and then just take that additional testimony. And then vote on it sometime next week. Anything else on this bill? Any other witnesses that we need to hear from that want to hear from? That's good. All right, thank you for coming in. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Natural Resources was dealing with soap, so I wasn't on yet.
So,
Yeah, so Yeah,
I just wanted to give the committee an update on S209. I met with, three of our legislative council attorneys this morning to dial in the language. And what we sort of landed on is language around the state, city and municipal buildings that are used to conduct business with the public. To really hone it in on like paying your taxes, paying your water bill, going to a select board meeting. So I haven't obviously seen the language, but I did have that meeting, so I just wanted to give the committee that update.
I'm just wondering. I mean, I know there are some state buildings that are essentially defunct, but we own them. But in general, the state buildings are conducting some kind of business with the public, no?
So what we basically went through is sort of what we're trying to get, and they were gonna sort of tweak the language, but they felt fairly certain that that would not, like, the dump is potentially a municipal building, and that would not include like dropping off your trash, like sort of like more official business. And again, I haven't seen the language, but I just wanted to give the committee the update of that's how we sought to narrow that into those more official and not the salt shed, not the dump, not sandbar.
it's a beautiful place.
It is a beautiful place, but that was my attempt to try and read the concerns, and I look forward to seeing the language, but I wanted to give you the update.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Any other points of business?
Are we doing OEA for that confirmation?
I believe we are actually gonna do it today.
Yeah, Friday.
I've been prepared to do it many days, and then for whatever reason, it did not happen.
Well, we usually hold them until Friday, so,
Yes, they're just,
yeah.
Let's look at our bill real quick.
provided I don't like fall down the stairs and break an arm, I'll be there to do it.
Well, I saw some music yesterday. Coming down the stairs by the lounge.
I fell down those stairs once and smashed myself up pretty good.
I think we're done for today. So happy Friday, everyone.
I move to adjourn.
We can go off.